In today's video brought to you by Squarespace, I'm going to be redesigning these two logos from our subreddit. Now the first one that caught my eye was this Bauhaus logo. So this dude redesigned the Bauhaus logo for a German European retail chain offering products for home improvement, gardening and things like that. The two logos contain two houses that form the letter B horizontally. I couldn't help but feel like I could maybe improve this design because it's vertical. People don't really read letters vertical, especially if it's a singular letter. The form of the design is pretty good, but it's quite wide as well. When we're looking at icons, we try to keep them in a very square grid. So I felt this design could use a bit more of a reduction, not just trying to make it simplistic, but I went ahead and tried anyway. The first thing I did is, instead of mind mapping and mood boarding, because he has already a very solid brand identity there, I'm just changing the mark. I went to my paper and I started sketching just a couple of concepts. Very quickly, I realized that the house could have this little chimney on it, and we could stay within the design that he's created by creating this wraparound effect underneath the house, which could create a door. I quite like this effect. I tried different ways of creating the icon as well, where we created this sort of arc at the bottom. Now, instead of creating the letter B, it's a lot easier to create the letter H for Bauhaus. So that little chimney acts as the stem of the H, whilst the actual house shape makes the H part of it. And I quite liked that design. I tried to come up with different forms in my sketchbook. Something that I like to do is just draw the letter H or draw the things that I'm trying to get into the design. So I drew a very basic house, then draw the letter H or any sort of like nouns that go along with it, and try to mash them together in a way that is geometrically apparent. Eventually, I liked one of the sketches and I wanted to bring it into Adobe Illustrator. The first thing I wanted to do was create a grid, and there's this really cool function inside of Illustrator where you go to the line tool, hold down, you'll get this grid function. It will create a very basic shape of grids, just squares. And what this does is it helps keep your icons and logos, especially icons, in line. It keeps things gridded and in time and in rhythm. So I basically just used the pen tool and traced it out for a while, going very cut and dry with this. I'm just wanting to see what will happen. Very experimental. That little tail at the bottom of the house looked pretty good. I quite liked it, but the problem was it was quite square. So to add a bit more of character to this, I wanted to make it into an actual door. Something that a lot of designers forget to do is at the top where two lines meet and it creates this point. That needs to be taller than the actual height of a squared object. Like the letter A, for example, on the grid and the cap height, it will be slightly taller because that's overshooting to give the visual look that it is correctly placed. It's called balancing, optical balancing. I tried to round corners of the design to make it more interesting. This was more of an experimental one, but it just didn't feel right. So I was quite happy with the form of the design, but there was a few balancing issues. You see that line at the bottom where it connects to the door? That needs to be slightly thinner, and that's the same for any horizontal line. Needs to be thinner than the vertical line that it's attached to or intersecting. That's because our brains are really good at seeing the width of something, but not always good at seeing the height. We're not, as humans, very versed in seeing the height. So we try to lower that width to make it optically look the same width as the vertical stroke, which is a bit strange. We do this in type design all the time. So just select those points with the direct selection tool and essentially just drag them down or use the arrow keys to make them slightly thinner to the point, and I'm just eyeballing, to the point of where it looks good and works well for the design. I also didn't put the door exactly in the middle of the design either, because we have this large chimney or stem on the left-hand side of the design. It needs to actually be further to the left to balance it out slightly. Remember, logo design, icon design is all about proportion and balance. If we can get those two key things right, any sort of design looks good. I was happy with the design, so I chose a typeface which is very similar, just Helvetica. Everyone loves Helvetica. It's like the new Comic Sans now, but no matter what you write with it, it just looks great. I wrote Bauhaus in there and Helvetica, played around with the spacing, because this is where a lot of people get confused or they fall short, is the clear space for the design or knowing where the icon should be and how thick it should be. The general rules I have is if it's aligned icon like the one that I've got here, you want to try and get the lines to be as thick as the typeface. This is where variable fonts come in very handy. Unfortunately, I don't have a variable font with Helvetica Neue, you just have fixed weights. So I chose medium because that seemed to fit the line weight exactly at the scale of what it looked good at as the icon. And I used the letter H inside of Bauhaus to be the scale and distance away from the logotype, because that seemed to be the central letter with a good weight. I could have used the U or an N with Helvetica Neue. So every time I try to balance a logotype and an icon next to each other in this composition, I always use like a shape within the logotype or the icon itself to balance it around. That's what dictates the space. I'm always borrowing bits of a design because that's how good design is. It always follows a system and a rule. We don't just pull out numbers from thin air. I put the obligatory registered mark on there to make it look all official, and then I went into Photoshop and started creating some cool mockups for it. You can't just have a logo and that's it. You have to have mockups. So I created this poster that I quite liked. The idea of the wavy lines being that it follows the same sort of rules as the house icon. I like the way that it kind of molds together. It looks quite, I don't know, trippy, but modern at the same time. I used an extension called gridit.io, the link will be down below, to grid this up and make it look cool. This is a great way of presenting your logos to a client to make it look even more fancier. And boom, I have the logo right there. It looks pretty decent. So with this design, it essentially has an H in it, and it could be the letter B as well because it's curling around. I quite like the form of it. It might seem to be a little bit generic, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Here is a side-by-side comparison of the original one and then my one. I thought it was all going really well until I realized at the end that I spelt the whole thing wrong. Another design that I saw on our subreddit was retro prints. Now this story is mad, but before I get into it, I just want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you're a designer watching this, or even just a creative professional, or anyone, a student, someone who works full time, you need a website because that's the way that you get seen. It's not good enough just to have social media. I get so many designers asking me, how do you get clients? And I always ask them, do you have a portfolio website, not a Behance page or just an Instagram page or a Facebook page? Do you have your own site? And most of the time they say no. Well, if you are that person and you don't want to spend loads of time building your website, Squarespace is brilliant for you because with the thousands of award-winning, fully customizable templates, Squarespace allows you to create your own stunning website very quickly and affordably. I'm no web design genius. I don't know how to code, but I can make a website look cool. And what Squarespace allows you to do is take a template or even start from scratch and build your own website like we do in, Adobe Illustrator. It's like mocking up a website, but it's actually creating one. It's pretty wild. And if you are building a Squarespace website, something you will need is a portfolio page, a case study page where you go more in depth about your projects, kind of like what I'm doing today, a contact page for clients to contact you, and a homepage where clients can learn more about you personally and why they should work with you. Now, if you go ahead and click the link down below or use my code, you'll get a free trial of Squarespace. That means that you can just build the website for free, and when you're ready to publish it, you just use that code or click that link and you'll get 10% off. And that includes your domain as well. So if you want to get 10% off your domain, click that link. Now, the main problem with retro prints design wasn't the form. I quite liked it. It actually sparked inspiration in me. I don't think there's anything too wrong with this design. However, I wanted to make it more retro. This design to me just seems like a font that's been written out and a line being straight through. Sometimes logos are great like that. However, this time I wanted to go a bit different. I thought I really liked that idea of it being like top down. I really liked the presentation that they gave it as well in their image. So I did, what if we were to do more of a retro style, vintage style design with the script lettering? So me being a logotype designer, I took out my paper, quickly did a rough brush script of retro prints of how it could be, and I was stoked. I thought this would look great. So straight into the iPad, I start designing this. The reason why I go from paper to the iPad is because I have more control sometimes over the iPad and I don't have to use as much paper. Sometimes it just calls to me. I start drawing and I think I'm getting somewhere. I quite like the design that I've got. So I clean it up, bring it into Illustrator, and I've done this monoline look. I don't want it to be too brush script because brush script is kind of modern. I wanted it to have that old school vibe. So make it monoline. And it looks great. However, the problem is it doesn't sit right with me. The letter forms in RetroPrint are very difficult to recreate in a monoline script, and it was starting to bug me. In fact, I'll speed this whole process up for you. I spent way too long obsessing over the design of this that I scrapped that one and went in a completely different direction. The problem that I was having with the design was that it just didn't look good at small scales. It just didn't fit, and I hate the word, the vibe. I wanted that art to come straight down like the original one, but I said to myself, I'm not doing that because one, although it's a cool design, I don't have to be confined by this. This is just a fun video. Let's just do it. So I went and chose a completely different style. Instead of going vintage, I went ultimate retro with this cool bubbly typeface, and I created a stacked design. I got my iPad out and started roughly sketching in what I wanted my art to look like, which was the basis of the design. I wanted this to feel quite soft and squidgy, which is a lot of retro fonts like. It's got a lot of character to it, a lot of life. It doesn't feel corporate at all. And I feel like the original design felt very bog standard, not in a bad way, but because it didn't feel custom enough. And when we're looking at print, we want it to feel custom. So I went ahead, created it on the iPad, I cleaned it up, and I went through using another pen with a lot of streamlining, which basically makes my lines smoother in Procreate. Drew it out and I hopped into Glyphs. Now this app is for font creation. However, it's got an amazing pen tool in there. So for logotypes, vectorizing your logotype, there's a system for it. It's called the top, down, left, right. And I talk more about it in our course called Logo Launch. And if you want to learn how to do this entire process for clients and up your design game, get paid more, I'll leave the link down below for you to check out Logo Launch. It's unreal. So I'm in Glyphs, I'm pen tooling the design, and we get to the point of where I like it. So I copy it, paste it straight back into Adobe Illustrator. And this is where the magic happens. I start messing around with the design slightly. I make sure the kerning is all good. I make sure that some of the points are kind of rounded where they need to be. And I still wasn't quite happy with the design. It felt like it wasn't hugged enough. It just felt kind of separated. So instead I went to Object, Path, Offset. And what this does is it offsets the letter forms. And this is a really important part because now that we've offset it, it's got a border, it's kind of framed and it looks good. It looks a lot more squidgy. Then using the shape builder tool, I select everything and I deleted the letter forms out of it. Now creating a mock-up little tote bag looked pretty cool, but then I wanted to put it on a t-shirt because I think that's where it would work best. Kind of like this hype beastie t-shirt with a cool groovy font that I see all the youngsters wearing. Can't believe I'm saying that. 29 years old. And there is the design in all its glory. This one was really fun and really interesting to create. But I didn't stop there. I actually wanted to make the t-shirt feel a little less just logo. And I thought, you know what, it's a print shop. It's gonna have paint in there, like screen printing. So let's create some like little drips to make it look like it's kind of mellow and drippy. So went in with the pen tool and my graphics tablet, which is always something you should have. Created some drips, making sure they're all vertical down to give the effect. Brought it back into the mockup, and I get my mockups from mockupsdesign.com, link in the description, and boom, we have a cool new idea of a logo. And what I like about this one is that it feels a bit more friendly, feels a bit less corporate, and feels more retro than vintage. So here's the original RetroPrint logo, and then here is my version there. Which one do you prefer? I've got to say I like mine, but also it's so much more retro. I just love it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please share, subscribe, and that helps support the channel. If you want to learn the art of bespoke logotype design, which is what you've seen here with RetroPrint, I've got a course called Logo Launch where I walk you through an entire client project on how to design and vectorize and the business of design, all this with logotypes. It really stands you out from the crowd being able to create custom bespoke typefaces and logotypes. So go ahead, check out the course, link in the description. Thank you again. And if you made it this far, comment apples, and I'll see you in the next video. See you soon. Goodbye.